Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to week 7 of our online machine learning sessions. As you know that we were discussing unsupervised learning domain from our previous lecture, and we have already covered the foundations of unsupervised learning and the clustering domain. So we have seen that when we move from the supervised learning domain to unsupervised learning domain, then we mainly perform clustering as compared to classification. And we also discussed that the basic difference between a classification algorithm and a clustering algorithm is that we don't have the label data, or you can say that we don't have the target classes, so that we could perform classification. So that's why in unsupervised learning domain, in order to understand the behavior or patterns in the data set, we try to make groups of similar objects, and these groups of similar objects are basically known as clustering. So in clustering algorithm, I told you that we will discuss 2-3 algorithms, and one of these algorithms is k-means clustering, which we will be covering in this lecture. So we already had a little bit of introduction. Let's have a quick recap of that, and then we will go into the details of the k-means clustering algorithm. So we know that the clustering is basically an unsupervised learning approach in which we don't have the labeled or target outputs. And we also know that there are a number of approaches which can be used to perform clustering in unsupervised learning domain, and one of the most commonly used algorithm is k-means clustering algorithm, and it is fairly simple algorithm, and it is used most of the time in order to perform clustering. And k-means is a variation of the basic k-means algorithm, and it is also employed sometimes, and it is less sensitive to outliers. And we also have hierarchical clustering algorithms, which basically works for symbolic attributes, and this can be used to fill in missing values. So sometimes when we have some missing values or missing data in our entire data set, then in order to fill those values, we normally use, and sometimes for in order to perform extrapolation or interpolation, these can also be used. So what you should be able to understand after this lecture is that you should have a basic understanding of the concept of clustering, and in clustering specifically we are targeting about and talking about the k-means clustering algorithm. And then we will explain the k-means clustering algorithm in detail, and I will provide diverse usage examples of the k-means clustering algorithm so that you can understand different challenges that we usually face when we use k-means clustering algorithm, right? So what is the basic motivation, or like we can say that why we need to use clustering, or we can say that what is the clustering basically. So finding natural groupings between objects, and if we want to find the similar characteristics or natural groupings between different objects, then we tend to perform clustering. Similarly, if we want to find similar objects, for example, if we have a bunch of documents and we want to have some similar documents and then another class which have similar documents, so in this case, where we want to have some similar attributes of different documents, then we can perform clustering. So our basic target or basic aim while creating clusters is to have high intra-cluster similarity and low inter-class similarity. So let's have a look what is the difference between high intra-cluster similarity and low inter-cluster similarity. So if you look in this figure, you will see that this yellowish line here, this dotted yellowish line basically shows the intra-cluster intra-class cluster, right? Because it basically tends to define the difference between these two clusters, because here we have two different clusters, and this red line is basically telling the inter-class cluster, right? Because this is within the cluster and this is to another cluster, right? So the target is to have high intra-cluster similarity and low inter-cluster similarity. Now, if we talk about the applications of clustering, in order to have to understand the importance of clustering, we can say that clustering can be used to organize data into clusters, which shows internal structure of data. And sometimes, in order to perform partitioning, we also use clusters, and that partitioning can help to in a number of applications. For example, one application can be market segmentation. Another important application for clustering is to prepare for other AI techniques, right? So if we want to apply different techniques related to artificial intelligence, then sometimes we make clusters, or we perform clustering as a pre-processing algorithm, and this can be used in order to summarize news or maybe some other objects. Another useful application is to have different data, and if we want to understand the underlying concepts of the data or patterns, then we use clustering for this task. Similar example is a web document search, right? So when we use a web browser in order to search for a specific document, then at the back end the search engine basically performs the clustering of different documents, and by using those clustering, it helps us to view the desired document. So here is the basic difference between a supervised learning and an unsupervised learning. In supervised learning, we basically perform classification, while in unsupervised, we perform clustering. And classification, we have a number of classes, and those classes are known, but now we don't have known classes, or we don't have labels. Here we have a set of training data, but here usually we don't have a priori knowledge, right? So these are basically the main difference between the two domains. So in clustering and classification, in classification, we basically draw decision boundaries, and those decision boundaries classify different patterns or sets of data. While in clustering, we try to make groups or clusters of those objects which have similar attributes or which have similar characteristics. So the target is to make natural groupings of those instances which have some similar properties in them, provided that all those instances have unlabeled data, right? So we don't have any labels this time. So in this figure, you will see an example of clustering. So for example, here we have a plot of a scatter plot of any data set. So it can be related to any domain, and we have a number of instances. Now we don't know that which instances in this figure have similar attributes or similar properties, right? So if I execute a clustering algorithm on this data set, right? So I am having this data set as an input data set to a clustering algorithm, and when I will look at the output, I will have this kind of output, right? So here we have basically clustered this scattered information into three types of groups. So one is this green group, another is blue group, and the third one is this red group. So we can say that we have formed three different clusters out of this input data set, and out of these three clusters, we can say that this portion have similar attributes, and this portion, the objects present in this portion have similar attributes, and the objects which are present here at this location have similar attributes. So we can say that we have three categories or three clusters of data, and each cluster have a number of input samples which are being used. So this can help us to basically understand the different underlying properties or structures of these data samples.